I have shared the screen, Atul sir. Can you just
Yes,
confirm
sir.
if it is visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is visible, sir.
Okay, so I'm starting with the presentation.
Yes, sure, sir.
So Atul sir, if there is any break in the in between, like if my voice breaks or something, you can just
Yes, sir.
call me
Surely
and
I
give
will
me a
inform you.
heads up. Yeah,
Okay.
okay. So good afternoon to all the participants. My name is Yash Dhingra and I am a scientist B in Indian Computer Emergency Response Team or CERTIN, which comes under the Ministry of Electronics and IT for Government of India. And we are the nodal agency for handling cybersecurity incidents in the country. And today we are going to talk about introduction to threats, vulnerabilities, and countermeasures. So we are going to look at some current trends which have been going on in the cybersecurity domain for the past 2 or maybe 3 years in some cases. And we are going to look at some very basic terms and some basic countermeasures that uh, as a user of the internet and as a user of various devices we can take so that we can stay safe while browsing the internet. So let us start with the presentation. So first thing is let's just look at what the cybersecurity is. So this is the definition of cybersecurity. So it is the protection of computer systems from theft or damage to their hardware, software, or electronic data. So that is just a basic definition. And I think through this session, since we are already 3 days into the lectures, so you might have a fair idea about what it is. But we need to know why cybersecurity is actually important. The main reason why we need to study cybersecurity and why we need sessions like these is because we are more and more reliant on computer systems nowadays. And for something that used to be manual, maybe 5 years or 10 years back, is now in some way connected to the internet or is in some way has been computerized, as we call it. So we are reliant on computer systems heavily, and a lot of devices around us are also getting connected to the internet. So, for example, phone used to be just a phone some years back, probably 15 years from now. 15 years back, phone used to just be a phone. You could just pick up the receiver, dial a number, and it will call up to wherever you want to. But nowadays, since the past 10 years, phones have become smart. So that's why we call them smartphones. They've started connecting to the internet, and they are in themselves they are computing devices, very powerful computing devices. So phones have become smart. In a similar way, other devices around you are also getting connected to the internet, which we call the internet of things. So if you've seen the latest advertisements, you might have seen that air conditioners and fans and cars and various different common, simple, very simple household devices are getting connected to the internet. So the advantage of them being connected to the internet is that you can actually control them remotely. You can basically control these devices sitting anywhere in the world. So that is an advantage, but that comes with its own risk as well. So if you can control it from anywhere else, then it's possible that any remote attacker can actually get hold of this device and they can actually start misusing your device. So we don't want that to happen, and that's why we need to make sure that as users we are aware of the basic cybersecurity practices, so that we can stay safe and we can make sure that none of our devices or our systems are actually being misused. Then the next point is that a lot of our data is nowadays online. So I'm pretty sure all of you are using some kind of social networks, or you must be using some email service, especially the government email service or Gmail or any other email service. So if you're using any kind of email service, then definitely a lot of your personal communication and your personal details are actually online, and they are stored on some server on some remote location which is not even known to you. So we need to make sure that when we are logging into these systems, or when we are logging into our net banking websites, we need to make sure that we are safe and that nobody can actually get hold of our login information, basically username and passwords. So the last point is money is online. So even if you're not using your net banking or debit card or any other internet based money transactions, then still the bank itself is actually doing all the transactions online. So there are various gateways through which money is actually flowing. So banks are not exchanging physical notes. I'm pretty sure all of you are aware of that. So our money is also online. So which means that if you are putting some cash into the bank, if you're depositing some cash, then basically the bank is incrementing a value which they have stored somewhere in their database, which indicates your account balance. So that's why basically everything around us is getting online, and we need to make sure that we protect ourselves well. So the three goals of cybersecurity, these are three goals, and they are referred to as the CIA of cybersecurity in the colloquial language. The first one is confidentiality, then integrity, and the last one is availability. So confidentiality means that if you are communicating with somebody through the internet or through any other means, for example, then confidentiality means that only the receiver and the sender should be able to read that communication. Other than the sender, nobody should actually be able to see that communication. So that is maintaining the confidentiality of the internet of the communication. And next one is integrity. So integrity means that whatever value or whatever communication you are sending from your side, it should be delivered to the recipient in the same form. So if you are, for example, sending someone a message that uh, kindly transfer 10,000 rupees into my account, and the receiver actually is getting kindly transfer 1 lakh rupees into my account. So if somebody in the middle is able to change your communications, then basically the integrity of the communication is being compromised in this case. So we need to maintain the integrity, which means what you are sending should be the same thing that is received by the recipient. Then the next is availability. So if you are logging into your net banking account and you want to make an urgent transaction to your family or to some of your friends, then the availability means that the website or the server, the net banking server should actually be available to you 24/7 so that you can make the transaction at any point of time whenever required. If the website itself is not available, then basically even though you have the money in your account, you will not be able to send it across to somebody. So that is the availability. So these are the basic three basic goals of cybersecurity. Then moving on to some current trends, which for the past, I think, 2 years, these are the trends from 2019, I guess, or maybe some few events from 18 as well. So till 21, till the latest, I think November, December, I have captured some events in this. So it's possible some of these might have been in the newspapers and you might have seen them also. So nowadays, we are seeing a large number of attacks on banking infrastructure and even on telecom infrastructure lately. So the motive for any cyber attack could be different. Some cyber attacks are only for, for defaming a particular organization, and some attacks are aimed at, directly getting the money. So if you want to actually get a lot of money, then you basically attack a bank. So if you're attacking a user, you have some potential of getting some amount of money. But if you're attacking the entire bank, then there is a huge corpus of money which actually is at your disposal, and you can actually transfer it to your own account. So these are three examples of attacks on banking infrastructure which have happened in the past 2 or 3 years. And one of them is Cosmos Bank, which happened in August 2018. Another is City Union Bank. Both of these are actually cooperative banks of India. And this entire trend, I think, started with the Bangladesh central bank attack, which happened in 2016. And this was the main bank of Bangladesh, which was attacked, and it was a huge compromise. So I'll just give you a small example of what actually happened in the Cosmos Bank attack. And so Cosmos Bank is actually a Pune-based cooperative bank, and the attack was actually carried out by cloning a lot of debit cards. So when you punch in the debit card into an ATM machine, it is possible that some attacker has actually placed a skimmer device on the ATM machine, and through that skimmer machine, they are able to read the magnetic strip of the card, and then they can actually clone the card. and basically make a copy of your debit card. So a lot of debit cards of this particular bank were actually cloned, and they were actually, these debit cards were swiped in different ATM machines in 28 different countries, almost at the same time, and 78 crore rupees was actually withdrawn from the bank. And another attack almost simultaneously within a few days, which happened on this particular bank, was that the Swift gateway of the bank was actually compromised. So the Swift gateway is basically a system which actually validates the transactions between different parties. So when you make a transaction through your credit card or debit card, it actually goes through the Swift gateway, and then it is validated by Visa or Mastercard or whoever the agency is, and that is how your transaction is actually approved. So they were able to compromise the Swift gateway, and they were able to approve a lot of transactions which were fraudulent and which went through this gateway. And this way they were able to transfer around 14 crore rupees to a Hong Kong based bank. So that is what happened. It was a two-pronged attack on Cosmos Bank. Then moving on to the next case study, basically last year when COVID-19 happened, then the Indian government actually announced the Arogya Setu application, which was a contact tracing application, which was supposed to be installed by everybody so that the government could actually track the infections, and possible infections could actually be warned before they were infected, so that they could isolate themselves. So fake applications which with the same name as Arogya Setu started doing the rounds on WhatsApp and then SMSs. The user would actually get an SMS or a WhatsApp message which would say that it is mandatory to install this Arogya Setu application on your mobile devices, and you need to install this as soon as possible, so that because it has been mandated by the government. So this particular attack was mostly carried out on government officials, and especially on defense personnel. And this fake Arogya Setu application was actually a spying application, which was able to turn on the microphone of the device, and through the by turning on the microphone, it would be able to record a lot of conversations which were happening, and it was also able to take the contacts and the location history of the victim. So this happened last year, and you can see it was reported in 28th May 2020. Then TikTok was actually one of the applications which was banned last year, and we're going to look at this in further detail in my next lecture, which is going to be on mobile security. So I'm just going to brush through this very briefly. So TikTok was actually flagged by a lot of countries because it was collecting a lot of user data, and then it was doing data harvesting, and it was selling the data to a lot of advertisers. So you can see in August last year, it was actually flagged that TikTok is collecting a lot of user information from the mobile devices. Then this is an example of defacement, and defacement is a very simple attack which is not actually aimed at getting any monetary benefit, but it is simply to defame the organization. And you can see that the homepage of the website is usually replaced by the attacker, and it shows the name of the attacker group, whoever it is. So this mostly happens with government websites, and it is like a fun thing which is done by amateur attackers who are trying out different kinds of attacks, and they try this out on the government websites of India from outside. So this is an example of a ransom email. Here the victim actually receives an email which says that they have taken control of the victim's email ID, and they have taken some recordings from the camera and the microphone, and they will actually threaten the victim that if they do not pay some amount of money in bitcoins, all their details, including their contacts, their email history, and their whatever camera recordings they have done, they will actually release them into the public, or they will actually share it with the contacts of the victim. So this kind of attack, it's a very simple attack which is actually carried out by using fake emailer services. You can actually search for anonymous emailers on Google, and you'll find a lot of such services which actually allow you to send these fake emails, wherein you can actually specify both the from and the to fields. So if you're sending an email to somebody, you can actually change the from field inside the email so that it appears to be coming from their own email ID. So that's what this attack does. It's a very simple attack, but it has actually been going on since a long time. So we get a lot of these till date as well. Then this is an example of cryptojacking. So cryptojacking is made up of two words, crypto and jacking, basically crypto and hijacking. So crypto is basically refers to cryptocurrency, and hijacking is basically hijacking any famous website so that the users, when they visit this particular website, they start mining cryptocurrency for the attacker. So you can see that if in this particular page, you can see there is a small three line code which has been inserted into the code of the website, and this code is not doing anything harmful besides adding this cryptocurrency mining code. And basically, whenever any person actually visits this particular website, the your browser or your CPU resources will actually be used to mine cryptocurrency for the attacker. So if I want to mine cryptocurrency for myself, then I would need a lot of CPU resources, and that requires a lot of electricity also. But if I can get a lot of victims to actually mine cryptocurrency for me, then actually that scales up the operation, and that actually gives me a lot of money in return. So you can see that by just inserting this small three-line code, the attacker is able to trick a lot of users into mining cryptocurrency for them. Then this is an example of ransomware. This is a screenshot from the WannaCry ransomware, which actually started the trend of ransomware attacks some years back. And this is also an attack wherein uh, you will get a file inside your machine through some malicious email or through some other vector through a USB drive or something. And when this malware actually runs on your machine, it actually encrypts all your files on your desktop and all your important documents. And it asks you for some amount of money in ransom through bitcoins or through other cryptocurrency, which you need to pay to the attacker so that you can get back the access to your files. So the catch here is that even if you pay the attacker whatever sum of money they have asked, there is no guarantee that they will give you the decryptor tool in return. So there is always a risk even in paying. The best way to avoid this is to basically take care of your security by doing some basic countermeasures, which we are going to look at in the further slides. So through these slides, we have seen that there have been various different attacks, and whenever an attack is actually carried out, the attacker actually leverages some kind of vulnerability in the system so that they can actually get inside the system and then they can cause different kinds of harm. So we need to look at what a vulnerability is. So in very basic terms, you can see that this is a vulnerability. It is basically a hole in a fence. If you've made a fence and if you don't want anybody from the other side to cross over to your side, then you build a fence. But if unintentionally there is some hole which is left behind inside the fence, then that becomes a vulnerability. So this is the basic definition of vulnerability. A vulnerability is a weakness which can be exploited by an attacker to perform unauthorized actions within a computer system. So there are different kinds of vulnerabilities. We are going to look at three kinds of vulnerabilities or weaknesses, as we say in the common term. The first one is technology weakness. So technology weakness means that there is some vulnerability or weakness which has been left behind in the code of the software by the company who is distributing that software. So whoever is the OEM or whoever is the supplier of that software has unintentionally left behind some bug or some mistake inside the code, which is leaving some weakness for the attacker to exploit. So you might have seen that Windows keeps popping up and showing you that you need to update your machine, and you keep getting security updates even on your Android and iOS devices as well. So these updates basically are made available to the victim so that whatever unintentional weaknesses or vulnerabilities have been left behind in the software, they can be updated and they can be fixed. So the onus in this case lies with the supplier so that for fixing these particular kind of vulnerabilities. So the next kind of weakness is a configuration weakness. So if you might have bought some wireless, Wi-Fi modems from the market, and you might have seen that when you try to do the initial setup, it comes with a default username and password. So while you are configuring, you need to make sure that you change the default password of this particular device. Now, if you're leaving this default password on the device and you're not changing it, then this becomes a configuration weakness, which means that the device itself has not been configured properly. So the onus here lies both with the OEM as well as with the victim, because the OEM needs to make sure that it is taking best practices and it is not keeping default passwords. And the user needs to make sure that when they are getting this particular device, they need to change this default password so that the configuration weakness is not left behind. Now, the third kind of weakness is a security policy weakness. So security policies are actually enforced by the organization onto their users. So, for example, if when you enter when you enter the premises of your office or your workplace, you might be asked for ID cards to enter. So, this is a very basic security policy which is being enforced by the organization so that any unauthenticated person cannot enter into the workplace. So in a similar way, when you're trying to open your email accounts or when you're trying to open your net banking accounts, you need a login ID and a password. So this password is a very basic security policy which has been implemented, and nowadays it has been made mandatory by almost all vendors and almost all email providers that you need to have strong passwords on the account. And if you're not having strong passwords, it will start prompting you that you need to have, lowercase letters, uppercase letters, and numbers and special characters. So this is a basic security policy which is implemented and which is enforced by a lot of vendors and by a lot of email providers nowadays. So if the organization is not enforcing a proper security policy, then this becomes a security policy weakness. So we have looked at all the different kinds of vulnerabilities. And whenever there is a vulnerability which is identified by an OEM, or whenever some security researcher actually alerts any particular OEM regarding vulnerability in their software or in their hardware or their tools, the OEM actually starts to make fixes for these weaknesses or vulnerabilities. And these fixes are actually released as software updates or firmware updates onto their websites. So Certain actually tracks a lot of these vendors and the vulnerability fixes which are released by them on their websites. And we release vulnerability notes for a lot of vendors on our website. So you can visit the website of Certain and you will be able to see a lot of these vulnerability notes. Now, some basic best practices. We need to keep all our applications updated. So whenever there is an update which is released for any software, in most cases you'll receive a notification from the software itself or from your operating system also. So we need to make sure that we install these updates as soon as possible. Then we need to make sure that we are not using any pirated software. So pirated software does give you the functionality of a full version whenever it is a paid software. But in turn, it's possible that whoever is creating this for pirated software may have added some malicious code inside the software, and they might have actually done some. They might have added some malicious code which may be able to cause some harm on your machine. So this we should avoid all kinds of pirated software, and we need to make sure that we maintain a good and updated antivirus on all our machines. Now this is a basic function. This is like an overview of how an antivirus works. So just like a fingerprint can actually be identified, fingerprint can actually be used to identify a person. Basically, a fingerprint is like a small, a small image which can actually be used to identify and authenticate people. In a similar way, every file that resides on your machine or every file which is running on your machine actually has a fingerprint. And in technical terms, we call it a file hash. So whenever a file is actually running on your machine, we can actually calculate the hash, which is a small 256-bit or a 512-bit fingerprint of the file. And this particular hash can actually be compared to the hashes which are stored inside the database of the antivirus. And if the antivirus finds that this particular hash matches with the hash of another malicious file, in that case, the antivirus will give you an alert that this particular file that you're trying to run is actually a malicious file or a virus or a Trojan, and it will block the execution. In some cases, it will quarantine it. In some cases, the antivirus might actually delete the file itself. So this is a very basic overview of how an antivirus works. Nowadays, all the antiviruses are able to identify the behavior of the files, and even if they are not able to match the hash of that particular file with their database, with the behavior itself, they are able to identify the file, and they are able to mark a particular file as malicious or not. So there are a lot of antiviruses available. Some are paid and some are free. If you are going for free antiviruses, they will give you the basic features, but the paid antiviruses will have a lot of more advanced features. So you can actually evaluate and make your own decision what you want to purchase. So I'm just going to go through the chat section if there are any questions. Okay, so there is a question, what is the role of CAPTCHA? Even a hacker can fill in that. So, sir, actually, a CAPTCHA is not meant for to avoid hackers. A CAPTCHA is actually meant to avoid bots, which means if a human is coming to the website and he or she is trying to log in, then the person should be able to log in into the email or into the system. But if it is a computer system which is trying to do that, or which is trying to automate the login process, then it should not be able to enter. So this is actually to avoid DOS attacks on the server. So if there is a bot which is trying to which is trying to use arbitrary passwords on your email provider, so it will enter your username, and then it will start trying different passwords after every microsecond, because a bot can actually try different passwords at very high speed. So if a bot is able to try that, it may actually be able to jam the server, or it may actually be able to figure out the password by trying different combinations. So the captcha is actually uh, kept on email providers or on websites so that it can avoid computer systems from trying automated login attacks. And it is not meant to prevent hackers from coming in. So I hope I've answered that question. And then there is a question, are we to check the system regularly to see if there is a DOS attack? Otherwise, how do we know about it? So a DOS attack is basically a denial of service attack, which means it is not actually carried out on your personal machine. It is actually carried out on different websites where a lot of users would be going in to get different kinds of services. So for example, if an attacker wants to jam a particular website, for example, your net banking website, then it will start sending a lot of requests onto that particular website so that uh, the server is not able to handle the load, and then eventually the genuine users are not able to get access to that particular website. So in most cases, a DOS attack is carried out on these websites which are actually visited by a large number of users. Then how do we know man in the middle? So, sir, you cannot know about man in the middle. That is the whole point of it. We need to make sure about different best practices so that we can avoid this. And we're going to look at an example of this in the next few slides. So I'll be discussing this in the future slides. There is, okay, so I think there are one or two more questions. Can we spoof multiple emails at a time? So yes, sir, you can actually spoof multiple emails also. You can simply go to any of the anonymous email providers and you can send multiple emails to the same user. The user will actually, or the victim will actually think that the email is coming from their own email account. So that was the basic attack. Because if an email is coming from your own account, then you might be tricked into believing that the attacker actually has access to your email account. Now, the only way to find out whether the email is actually genuine or it is fake is to look at the email headers. If you're using Gmail, then there is a small three dot button on top of the email. If you click on that, you'll get a button called I think it's show original. When you click on that button, you'll be able to look at the headers of the email, and inside the headers, it will actually show you all the IP addresses and all the machines where the email has actually traveled and ultimately landed onto your email provider. So that way you can find out whether the email is coming from a genuine source or it is coming from a fraudulent source. Now, next question, even OTP facilities are there in banking, but customers are becoming victim of financial fraud. How to avoid? So, sir, OTPs are normally actually, yes, that is a second factor authentication, which is available nowadays with a lot of banking providers and even with a lot of email providers nowadays. But these attackers are using different kinds of attacks which come under the social engineering umbrella. So we are going to look at some of these attacks in this. And if you're getting a phone call which says that they are from the bank and you need to share a particular OTP from them with them, and if the victim is actually sharing that OTP, then automatically the transaction can actually be executed by the attacker. So we need to make sure of these best practices, and we need to make sure that we don't share any of your personal information via any of these social engineering attacks, which we are going to look at in these few slides. Is phishing and spear phishing one and the same? Sir, there is very slight difference. Spear phishing is basically meant for a particular person, and phishing is a general phishing attack. So if you are creating a website, basically a fake website of a very generic website, like for example of a particular bank like State Bank of India, and you are sending out mass emails to a lot of victims, and some of those victims are actually clicking on that particular fake link, and then they are visiting the website and giving their information. This is a general phishing attack. But spear phishing attack means that you're attacking one particular user or a single organization, and your email will be very specialized. In as an example, for example, your organization has a structure that your immediate boss is, like, for example, joint secretary, and you are getting a mail which says that this is an email from the basically an email from which an email which appears to be coming from the joint secretary. Then it becomes a it becomes a spear phishing attack, which means it is directly targeted on you as an individual. So that is a basic difference. So we are going to look at this phishing attacks and different kinds of phishing attacks because they come under the social engineering topic, and that is our next section. So moving on with the slides. So social engineering basically involves attacking the human link in the chain. And normally the human link is actually the weakest link in the security chain. And computer systems normally work the way they are designed to. If there is a weakness or a vulnerability, it is going to exhibit that. But otherwise, they cannot be tricked into revealing information which they are not designed to do. But humans can actually be exploited, and people can actually be tricked into revealing a lot of different information. And social engineering actually leverages the human link. So we are going to look at the different kinds of attacks which are carried out. The first one is phishing, and I think most of you would already be aware of this. So I'm going to very briefly touch upon this, and we're going to look at the different kinds of phishing attacks that are carried out. So phishing involves a fraudulent email or a fraudulent website, and you'll get an email which says that this is an email from your bank, and you need to click on this particular link to claim your claim your refund of some income tax, or you need to reset your password because your password is expiring. So various different kinds of attacks are there. And a lot of reports have been coming about this income tax phishing websites to us for quite a few years now, and there are different gangs which are operating. And I'll be talking about this particular case study in detail in my next lecture. But this is an example of a phishing email of the income tax department. So you'll see that it says that there is some refund which needs to be claimed by you, and you need to visit a particular website in order to claim that particular refund. And when you click on that particular link, you will be redirected to a website which looks like this. And you can see it is a fraud website of the income tax department. It has the same logo, and it looks exactly like the income tax department website. It has a drop down menu which asks you to select your bank, and then obviously the attack is carried out further, which we're going to look at this in detail in my next lecture tomorrow. Then this is an attack. This is basically a phishing page of RBI. The genuine website is rbi.org.in. The fake website looks like this. It is e-rbi.gov.in. This is a phishing page of Paytm. You can see it is asking for the OTP for signing in into Paytm. Then there are several websites which will give you, which will look like a genuine bank website. And for example, it is in this case, it is an attack of the Kotak Bank. And you'll see that it is showing you screenshot. The second screenshot is actually showing you screens of the mobile app of Kotak Bank. So there are several such phishing pages which are created by the attackers. Then this is different vectors by which phishing attacks are carried out. The first example is of compromised web servers. So instead of creating your own website, for which you will have to buy the domain and you'll have to buy the hosting services, you can actually compromise some other website, and you can actually create your own subfolders on the website, which looks like the phishing page. So you can see that the first one is notsosecure.com/bank name/login. The next example is by using free hosting or subdomain services. So there are a lot of domains which offer free subdomains on their web servers for free, and they are available to for anybody to register. One such provider is 000webhost.com. So anybody can actually go onto this website, register, and then anybody can actually register a fake subdomain on the website. So as an example, you can see that it looks like www.bank.com.freespace-sitename.com. So the actual website is freespace-sitename.com, but a subdomain has been created onto it. The next example is misleading domain name, which is also called type squatting. So basically you're adding one letter, or you're changing the spelling of the genuine domain name, and you're creating a fake website like this. So for example, if the website of SBI on SBI Net Banking is only online SBI.com. If, for example, you're changing that I into a 1, or if you're changing that I into an L, it's possible that users might be tricked. So this is called type spotting. Then the next example is of URL shortening services. So if you have a long URL, you can actually go to these URL shortening services like Bitly and Tiny URL and Short URL, and there are several other providers as well. So they will give you a very small little URL, which when the user actually enters onto their web browser, this will redirect you to the website, to the actual website. So these URLs, these URL shortening services are actually used for hiding the actual domain name, and these are used by a lot of attackers also. So these are the different kinds of attacks which are there in phishing, and these are some basic best practices which we should keep in mind. We should always make sure that the email source is genuine. As I said, that if you are in doubt that the email might be coming from a malicious source, then you can always look at the email headers, and you can analyze whether the IP addresses are genuine or not. Then the next one is that if you're receiving any email, you should not directly click on the links which are available inside the email. Instead, you should right click on that particular link, and there is an option for copy link source, or copy the URL, copy link URL. There is an option in all browsers nowadays. So you should copy the URL which is embedded inside that link, and then you should paste it inside your address bar and then open it instead. So that is always a better practice. If you're still in doubt, then you should actually search for the genuine website on some good search engine, and then that is how you will be able to find out the genuine website. So it's always, as I said, that you should copy the link and you should paste it in your address bar, or you should directly type it yourself instead of clicking on links. So these are some basic best practices for phishing. And another example of a social engineering attack is malicious attachment. Basically, you'll get an email inside your inbox, which will have some sense of urgency in it, and they will say that this is an urgent document which you need to see. And when you click on this particular document, it will actually infect your machine. So a lot of simple file types can actually be leveraged and weaponized, and even PDF files, doc files, Excel files, exe files, zip files, any of these files can actually be weaponized, and they can be leveraged for attacking the victim. So this is an example of phishing of a malicious attachment. So you'll see, please find attached an urgent message from Joint Secretary on the above mentioned subject. So you will receive such an email which would have some urgency to it, and there will be a document. When you click on this particular document, it will actually infect your machine, and it may either be able to it may either start transferring a lot of data from your machine, or it may do other kinds of harm. Now, the best practice is to always make sure that whatever email you are getting, it is from a genuine source, and you should make sure that it is coming only if that particular attachment is expected, and you know that the sender is going to send you this particular attachment via email. Only in that case, you should actually click on that attachment. Otherwise, you should always be wary, and you should always check before you open any attachments that you get inside emails. So the next one is honey trapping, and this is mostly carried out on government personnel and on defense personnel. You'll receive a friend request on any of the social media from a random unknown person, and they will start talking to you. They will befriend you, and once they have your trust, then they will send you some malicious link inside your inside the chat, and they will say that you need to install a particular messenger application on your device so that you can continue communicating with them or something like that. And this is actually a very commonly which is a very commonly executed attack on defense personnel. And this has actually appeared in the news a lot of times as well. So this is called honey trapping. And in a similar way, a similar kind of attack actually is carried out on common users as well. They will call you and they will tell you that uh, this particular your debit card or your net banking is actually expiring, and you need to do some process for actually retaining your debit card or for preventing your net banking account from being blocked. So they will say that you need to give them the login ID and password of your. They will give you a call and they will ask you for your login ID and password. And once they have logged in with that, they will ask you that I am I'm actually doing the process. I'm actually uh, uh, preventing your account from being blacklisted or something like that. And they will ask you for an OTP. And once the user provides the OTP, then obviously the transaction is carried out and the victim actually loses the access to the account, and they actually suffer monetary losses as well. So that's how these attacks are carried out. Then this is the last section. It's a very small section, so I'll just go through this and then we'll take the questions again towards the end of the presentation. So this is how to stay safe on the web. And these are some very basic best practices which I have personally been using, and I have personally tried them out. So I am giving it out as a suggestion. First thing is that you can actually try to search for your own name on Google or Bing or any other search provider, and just put your name inside double quotes and just search for your own name on Google. This way you will actually be able to find out a lot of information which has been already posted on websites which are publicly available. So some of this information might actually be confidential, and it might have been unintentionally posted by either by you or by some other acquaintances or by some other organization which you are affiliated with. So just by Google, just by searching your own name on a search provider, you'll be able to find a lot of personal information. Then the next step is that you should look inside the Google Images page, and you will be able to find out a lot of photographs which you might have unintentionally shared publicly on your social media accounts. And some of these post photos you may not want to be available publicly, and you can actually then go ahead and delete them or restrict the access. So this is a very basic tip which you can try out immediately after the presentation itself. And the next is that you should go through your social media profiles, just look at all the posts and all the photos that you have shared, and make sure that you have not posted any personally identifiable information, or PII as it is called, on any of your social media accounts. And make sure that whatever friend list you have inside in your social media accounts, there should not be any unknown people inside your friend list, because by default, all your friends in on your social media will be able to look at all the posts and photos that you share. So you don't want any unknown people from accessing all these personal information. And the next is rechecking your security settings on your social media profile. So just go through, for example, if you're using Facebook, then just go through the security settings and make sure that none of your posts that you make or none of your photos that you have posted are actually available publicly. The access should actually be restricted to your only your friend list, and nobody else should be able to look at your posts on the social media. So every bit of data that you post online is important. Your phone number, your address, or any of your simple information that you post online, thinking that this cannot be misused, can actually be misused by the attacker. So, for example, your phone number is actually your username to your Paytm account, and it can actually be leveraged and it can be misused. Even I think the Bheem application takes your phone number as your default UPI. So by sharing your phone number, you're actually sharing your UPI address as well. So unintentionally, it's possible that we might be sharing a lot of personal information, which should be avoided. And you should make sure that you are not sharing any excess information than which is required by the requester. And you should always keep all this information as secure as possible. Now, the next thing is that we should avoid signing in on untrusted system. So if you have to sign in on your email account and especially your net banking accounts, then make sure that you're doing that only through your machine, because you might be maintaining a good antivirus on your machine and you might be taking care of your all the best practices. But if only once you sign in on someone else's machine which is infected by some virus or malware, then you might lose access to your account. So it is always advisable to use only trusted systems for signing in into your accounts. And then the next one is using incognito or private mode. If even if you are in a situation that you are forced to sign in on an untrusted machine, then there is something called an incognito or an in private or private mode inside almost all browsers nowadays. Just use that incognito mode so that as soon as you close that window, your login session is actually terminated. Then USB web drives, we should always scan USB drives whenever they are connected to the machine, and autoplay should be disabled inside the Windows, so that only when you open a particular USB drive, it actually shows you the files and the file structure. And the last point, which is I think the most important, is that you should use multiple online identities for different purposes. So this basically means that you should use different email accounts for different purposes, and they should not be linked to each other, which means your official communication should stay inside your official email account, and your personal communication should be inside only your personal email account. So you should not interchange the roles. And similarly, if you're signing in onto any websites like any of the food delivery applications like Zomato or Swiggy or Book My Show or Amazon or Flipkart, so you should keep a separate email account for signing in onto any of these websites, and that particular email account should not have any of your personal email communication or your any of your personal contacts. So what happens is that uh, it's possible that some of these websites may suffer a data breach, and the attacker might be able to steal the login ID and passwords of a large number of users of these websites. Uh, but if you're maintaining segregation of your different email accounts, then even if this particular email account, which is being used for signing in into different website, is actually compromised, you will not lose access to your personal email account and your official email account. So that is a very important thing to do by segregating different roles for different identities online. Now, someone was talking about man in the middle attacks in the questions. Now, how is a man in the middle attack carried out? When you send any information to any website or any server, basically it is traveling through a lot of computer systems or and through a lot of routers and through a lot of gateways in while actually traveling to the destination. So anybody who is sitting on any of these machines, if it is a malicious attacker, they might be able to read whatever information you are sharing with the server, and they might be able to modify it. So if you are actually logging in onto a website which is an HTTP website, then basically your username and password are traveling as plain text on the network, and anybody can actually look at your login information. So this is an example of an HTTP website, and nowadays you'll see that almost all browsers will give you this notification whenever you are visiting an HTTP website. It will say that the connection to the website is not secure. And if you log in into such websites, your email account or your whatever your confidential information, it might suffer a man in the middle attack. So whenever you're signing in onto any website, you should just make sure that it is an HTTPS website. And whenever whenever you're opening an HTTPS website, you'll see that it looks something like this. The browser will have a lock icon on the side, and it will say that the connection is secure. So there are several links which will give you some sensational news, and it will entice you into clicking on that particular link, which will take you onto a fraudulent website. So it is always advisable not to click on any such links. And this is another example of such a fraudulent link, which will give you some kind of lure, and it will ask you to fill up some personal information. So these are some things that you can keep in mind. And this is the last slide. So we'll just look at the important best practices. Uh, we must use unique and random passwords, which are of some length, at least 16 characters for all our account. All these passwords should be unique, and uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, characters should be present inside the password. I think this is being enforced as a security policy by most providers nowadays. So this is anyways taken care of. And next one is that you can use password managers to remember your different passwords. I have not personally used any of these password managers, but since we have a lot of accounts nowadays and it's very difficult to remember so many different passwords, what you can do is that for your most important accounts like your net banking account and your personal email account, your official email accounts, you can actually remember your passwords. But for all the other accounts like your Flipkart or Amazon account, your Zomato account, you can actually keep different passwords, and then you can use a password manager for for basically storing your password. And whenever you try to sign in on any of these websites, you just need to enter one master password, and the your actual website password is actually supplied automatically. Then the next thing is that passwords should ideally be changed frequently. At least once a year, you should change your passwords. And the last point is that you should enable two-factor authentication wherever it is available. It is, I think, implemented by default by all the banking websites. But even some email providers like Gmail offer such services, two-factor authentication, and you should always you should go inside the settings and you can enable two-factor authentication, and you should always leverage this particular functionality wherever it is available. So this is the last slide. We are done with the presentation. I'll just go through the chat section to see if there are any questions. So there is a question which says in Play Store it is written verified by Play Protect. What is the meaning of this? And then can we believe this apps for use? If no, why? So basically, whenever a developer is actually publishing a particular application on the Google Play Store uh, or on the Apple App Store for that matter, it actually goes through a lot of security checks. And these security checks are